Hello, welcome to this next session on developing a philosophy of leadership. This is one of those things that I personally am extremely passionate about. If I was with you in person, you would see me walking up and down and moving my hands, but I have this little box here that I'm supposed to stand in for the recording here. So I hope you get the sense and I can convey to you the sense of excitement I have about this topic, because I believe it is absolutely fundamental to successful leadership. I have been working with leaders now for 25 years in all different settings, all different venues, all different industries. And I am consistently surprised at how many leaders are not aware of their leadership philosophy. Now, what's interesting about that is every person has a leadership philosophy, but very few are aware of what that is and what they went through to develop that philosophy. So I want to talk to us in this session for the next, hopefully 30 minutes or so, about developing a philosophy of leadership and what exactly that means. Because without a philosophy of leadership, you will not be able to make the decisions you need to make with the conviction you need to make them. And what's so important that we understand what are the underpinning assumptions or the foundation of what we think leadership is and why it is and how it works, etc. So this particular session is a little bit philosophical in nature. It goes in, we talk a little bit about philosophy as a traditional subject. We talk a little bit about the experiences that we've had and how those inform what we do. What's interesting about this topic to me is, again, what I believe is absolutely fundamental and critical, and how often it's neglected or skipped over in a course of study. We spend a lot of time on leadership theory, leadership research, and all those things that are incredibly important, models of leadership, all the different ways, and I love that stuff also, but I think it's a mistake not to spend some time on the philosophy of leadership that you are going to personally develop through time. And I can't teach you a philosophy of leadership. You can't read about a philosophy of leadership in a book. It is something that is personal and unique to you, but you need to be aware of what went into that. So I have 3 goals for this session. The first goal is to just cause panic in your own leadership journey. I want to cause you to question your leadership assumptions, or to at least explore what your assumptions are. The second thing I want to do is introduce to you the notions of ontology and epistemology as they're related to leadership. Now, these are terms you would typically study in a course on philosophy, but they have specific bearing and impact on your leadership journey and your leadership process. And then thirdly, I would like to introduce the concept of tacit knowledge and how that's related to leadership. So let's start with exploring our assumptions. Take a minute and just look at this cartoon. It's one of these cartoons that's used a lot. You may have seen it, but I want you to see what's actually going on here. We have a manager or a boss who's doing a leadership development program, and he has a rich diversity of population. So people from different experiences, different skill sets, different backgrounds, different cultures, whatever, that all those animals represent the diversity of our normal organization. But because of his leadership philosophy, or what he thinks it is, he thinks that leadership is demonstrated this certain way. And he gives this test to all his management trainees about leadership. And he says, if you want to be considered a leader, everyone has to, and you can insert a blank, whatever that is for you. And in this case, it's climb the tree. And you can see, based on the population that he has to work with, not everyone is going to be able to climb the tree. And that is a poor representation of a leadership ability or skill. The issue is, this is exactly what we all do every day. This thing right here. We have an assumption about what leadership is. Leadership is being able to climb this tree. And if you can't climb this tree, you are not a leader. That's actually not true. For you in your journey, leadership required this certain thing, but that might not necessarily be true for something else. You are biasing how you view the world based on your philosophy of leadership. Again, that's not wrong. In fact, I think it's right. But what is inaccurate, or what does cause problems, is when we don't understand what our philosophy is. This professor here in this cartoon really doesn't understand his philosophy is negating 90% of the people there. That elephant's not going to be able to climb that tree. The fish and the seal and the penguin aren't going to be able to climb that tree, but who is? The monkey and the bird are going to be able to do it exceptionally well. But if the test was something else, like swim the ocean or swim across the channel, guess what? That elephant's not going to do that, but the seal and the dolphin, or the seal and the fish and the penguin will be able to do it well, the bird not at all, or the monkey. So this is symbolic of what are our assumptions, okay? So this has to do with questioning your assumptions. I want you to consider, I am asking you, take the time. It will not be wasted time. Take the time to consider, what is it you are assuming about leadership? If you were in that seat that professor is behind the desk, and you had that population in front of you, and you were giving a test of leadership to see who could be a leader, and you had to make that statement, to be considered a leader, everyone has to blank. Insert your own blank line there. Take out the climb a tree, insert your own blank line there. What would go in that blank? How many blanks would you have? And then once you have that written down, or once you have that in your mind, are they actually descriptions of leadership, or are they descriptions of something else? And is it something that everyone has the opportunity to be able to do, or even the ability to be able to do? In order to be a true valid test, everyone has to have the opportunity and the ability to be able to achieve it. I am suggesting to you that so much of what we think about as leadership precludes so many different people, because not everyone has the ability or even opportunity to perform them. So the things that you would use to fill in that blank should be things that everyone can do and everyone has the opportunity to experience. So I want to really, hopefully, as I mentioned earlier in my first goal, cause some commotion or even some chaos in your own leadership thinking. What is it that you are assuming makes someone a leader? It used to be, if you studied trait theories of leadership, for example, which you should be familiar with, if you studied the trait theories of leadership, you would know that old studies from antiquity and even older than that, leadership was based on innate traits someone was born with. Someone was born to be a leader, for example, because they were the son of the king or the emperor or the pharaoh. By virtue of being the son, even if they were total morons, total idiots, they still were going to be king next, because that was their birthright. It's a trait theory. If you look at old trait theory research, you'll see that one of the most common distinguishing characteristics of a good, successful leader was height. Literally, how tall they were. Taller people seem to occupy positions of leadership more than most. So when you look at a study of leaders back from that era, you would have seen that, well, one of the things that you need to be is tall if you want to be a good leader, because all the good leaders that we have examples of are tall. You can see how that's problematic. We need to begin to understand that leadership is more than those things, and it takes a courageous manager, a courageous person, to take the time to really consider and understand what those things are. So that is hopefully causing a little disruption to your assumptions about leadership and what they are. I would ask you to continue to do that. Another big question that comes up often is, are leaders born or made? This is a common, if there was philosophy within the leadership world, a philosophical question that everybody muses over, it would be this: are leaders born or made? Now, the essence, of course, or the answer, of course, is yes, both. Leaders are obviously born. Now, they have to be, because everybody is born, but they are also made. So the question here is an issue of ontology, the essence of leadership. How does one become a leader? All right? So that's what ontology is related to leadership. It's the essence of leadership. So I have here a statement in the first bullet point. I am a blank. Now, what goes in that spot for you personally? I remember my professional trade by training is an athletic trainer. So when I went to university and got my bachelor's degree, I studied athletic training, or what we refer to in the United States as sports medicine, athletic training. And I would say for years, when I was introduced or I met somebody for the first time, I'd say, hi, I'm an athletic trainer. When they asked me what I did, I'm an athletic trainer, or I am a man, or I am a husband, okay? I wasn't always a husband and I wasn't always a man, but at some point I became a husband and I became a man, and that process of becoming those things is ontology. I would ask you, what goes in that blank? If you were to say, I am a leader, how did that happen? Were you born a leader, or did you become a leader? Or were you born with the innate ability to be something and there was a process that took you there? I was born to eventually be a man, but I was not born a man. I had to go through several things, a process to do that. Now, I was born a male with the chromosomes and all the physical features needed to be a male. I was born, so you could say that I was a man then, but not technically. And this is the same problem we have with leadership. If you were to fill in that blank, I am a leader, I am a manager, I am a supervisor, I am an administrator, the issue or the essence of, are you that by definition of that's who you are as a being, or that's what you do? Because ontology is about becoming that as an essence of who you are. I am a man, whether I'm at work, at home, playing with my children, doing yard work, whatever. No matter what I'm doing, I am a man, because that's the essence of who I am. Whether I'm with my wife or not, I am a husband. For example, I'm not a husband when I'm with my wife, and then single and not a husband when I'm not with my wife. I have become a husband through the process of time, and as I understand more and more what that is, it has changed me whether I'm with her or not with her. Now, apply that same thinking to leader. I am a leader. I am a boss, the manager, whatever. Are you that because of the position you have? So when I go into work, I'm the boss, I'm a leader, I'm a manager, but when I leave work, I'm no longer the leader. This is a really important question to answer. Think of it in terms of a fatherhood. I'll go back to my own example of myself with my sons. I am a father, and my role as father changes with my kids and how they recognize me. So for example, when my son is 4 years old and he does and wants to do something and I don't want him to do it, I will say, no, you can't do that. And he might ask me why. And I'll say, well, because I said so. I'm not going to argue and negotiate with a 4-year-old. But when my son is 17 or 18 and he wants to do something and I say, no, you can't, and he says, well, why can't I? I can't give the same response because I said so. Even though I'm his father, my role in his life has changed. I am still always his father, but my influence has changed. Eventually, he will leave and become a father himself and his own, but I will still always be his father, even though he doesn't have to obey my rules. Same thing with leadership. Manager is a position we punch in and punch out of. You're my manager. I have to listen to you when I'm on the clock because you signed my paycheck. Very transactional process. But the transformational process, when you become a leader, it's not dependent upon your employees or your subordinates or your followers having to listen to you or not, because they're required to. When you become a leader by essence of who you are, you'll find yourself in situations where you run into someone outside of the work context and they still respect you. They still look to you for advice or for mentorship. This is when you've become a leader and not just occupied a leader role. And this is the essence of ontology, the aspect of becoming a leader in the essence of who you are, regardless of the context you are in. So we address this by leaderness or identity. And in other words, my leaderness needs to become part of my identity as who I am, not my job description. I mentioned earlier on that I was an athletic trainer. I remember the first time was at a cocktail party. It's a true story. And I was talking to someone, being introduced for the first time, and they asked what I did. And I shook out and I said, I'm a professor. And now I had been a professor for 7 years at this point. But I've never introduced myself or thought of myself as a professor. Up until that point of time, I had still always said to people, I'm an athletic trainer. And I never even occurred to me until I was driving home that evening, and my wife kind of noticed that, and she said, you know, that's the first time I ever heard you say you were a professor and not an athletic trainer. I actually felt kind of guilty, like I was betraying my old profession for this new profession. But what I didn't understand at the time was I had walked into this new role and become something else. I'd become a professor in essence of who I was and how I thought. And I bring that up because I really want you to consider this from the perspective of leadership. And ask yourself this question: are you really a leader? Think about it. Are you a leader in the leaderness of your identity, or are you just occupying a role or position of leader? Do people around you, whether they work for you or not, consider you a leader? Do people around you, whether they have to obey you or not, or respect you or not, do they do that nonetheless? These are important questions. I would suggest to you that many of us aren't leaders in our identity and essence of who we are because we don't understand the process of ontology, the act or study of being. To illustrate that, there's a book by Malcolm Gladwell you can see there called Outliers. I recommend it. In that book, he describes this concept of the hockey player, and it's one of the opening stories in the first few chapters. He talks about what it means to be a hockey player. And what he found is, the story goes like this. He was at a hockey game. It was an elite hockey tournament he was observing. And he had a program there with all the teams and all the rosters of all the teams in this elite hockey tournament. Grade A, these were going to be professional hockey players, many of them. And he happened to be looking through the roster and had their height, their weight, their birth year, their birth month, and all these things. And he noticed in the roster that a vast majority of the hockey players, almost all of them, had birthdays, birth months within 3 months of each other. And he thought that was too much of an incredible coincidence to actually be a coincidence. So he started this research study to look at why is it that elite hockey players are all born within 3 months of each other. He joked about, well, maybe it's the lunar eclipse and something with the moon and the gravitational pull of the earth when it's these three, joking about that, realizing that that really wasn't an option. He wanted to know what was going on. So what he uncovered through several years of investigation here is that how hockey, especially in Canada, how hockey works is all of the players from all the different provinces and districts go to these centralized locations once a year for these tryouts and to be categorized and placed in different divisions. And what he found is that they were age related. So in other words, all 8-year-olds report to this date at this time, all 10-year-olds here, etc. And they begin to appoint all these kids to these different divisions at 8 years old. So it didn't matter when you were born in terms of month, it only mattered that you were 8 years old. So what happened is when all these kids who played hockey became 8 years old, they went to this central location with all of these coaches from all these different teams. Now, you could have turned 8 years old today, or you could be 8 years old, 11 months and 29 days old. In other words, essentially 9 years old, but you still fell in the 8-year-old category. They were all measured together. So essentially what happened was this: you had all 8-year-olds, but still 12 months apart in age. And what they found is that those kids who were 8 years old, 11 months, and 29 days, or thereabouts, within 3 months, were better They were better than the 8-year-olds who were just 8 or newly turned 8, because there was essentially a year's worth of difference in body weight, maturity, dexterity, all the skills that at 8 years old, 1 year of maturity is a lot in strength and speed and stamina and coordination. What they found out is that these kids who were actually only better because they were stronger and faster at that age were put into one group, the elite group, who had better coaches and 20 or 30 more games a year and better competition than these other kids who were put in other categories, like the lower divisions, because they weren't as fast and strong and they were said to be not as good, when in fact that's not really true. It ended up being a consequence of their age. Now, what happened, however, is that over time, those players who initially were only better hockey players because of their age and the strength actually did become better when you went back to those same players when they were 21 years old, for example, or 18 years old. They were significantly better than the other ones, and they were the ones being on all these elite teams. The reason why they were better then is because they were put on these other teams. As I said, the coaching was way better, the competition was way better, and the number of competitions was significantly higher. So they were playing more hockey under better conditions with better coaching, better instructions, and over the course of time, they became better hockey players. Even though they weren't necessarily better at the beginning, they were just faster because they were a year older. And then, so really, the idea of becoming a better hockey player wasn't genetic predisposition, it was luck on when your birthday fell and when they had the date, whenever the date was that they assigned when these 8-year-olds would come, what time of the year they came. So it was random. It was random chance. They were outliers in this equation and not necessarily actually genetically born better hockey players. This has a lot of implications for leadership. A lot of times we have similar kinds of issues with leadership development. We pick certain people because of certain characteristics early on that identifies them as a leader. We put them in courses, we give them books, we give them resources, we give them other things, and they eventually become better leaders because of what they go through and experience had they not. Now, this means for us, though, that we can do that with anybody at any time. So here's where the analogy kind of fails and we can develop leadership. If we want to develop leaders, it doesn't matter if you're 18, 25, 6, or 45. If you're willing to go through the process of becoming a leader, you can do it at any point. You just have to be willing to do the coaching, read the books, take the courses, and most importantly of all, because reading those things and attending lectures doesn't make you a leader, you have to be willing to practice leadership types of behaviors and put yourself out there. Okay, so that's the born or made. Yes, they are born, but they are also made, and we have to understand that leadership can be practiced by anyone, but not everyone will become a leader. So that's kind of, again, what are your assumptions about leadership? Do you assume certain people are born to be leaders or that people can become leaders? It's, again, back to a sport analogy. Think in basketball. I can play basketball, okay, but I'm not very good at it. And I can play basketball, and I can even practice basketball. I can take 5 or 6 hours a day, dedicate weeks and weeks and months to practice a basketball and become a better basketball player. But I still won't be as good as LeBron James, for example, or Kobe Bryant, or Magic Johnson, or some of these famous basketball players who were born good. They also practice. I can, again, play the game. I understand the rules. I know how to dribble and shoot and pass, and I can play the game, and I can practice a lot and get significantly better. But I still might not ever be as good as someone who's born to be it and continues to practice and play, like LeBron James, for example. He might be in a one-on-one competition. He might beat me the first time 21-0. I can practice for 2 years every day, all day, and become significantly better and still play him. And I might do better, and he might only beat me 21-12, and I've improved 120%, but still not as good. Same things with leaders. There are people who are born to be leaders and naturally excel at it, but even those who aren't can still become a leader. And that's really important that you understand. Is that reality part of your leadership philosophy or not? And this is important. Let's move on and talk about what philosophy is. So philosophy is basically the study of the theoretical basis of a branch of knowledge or discipline. Relative to leadership, in the yellow words there, it says a theory or attitude held by a person or organization that acts as a guiding principle for behavior. This is what I want you to consider. What is your theory or attitude that you hold or that your organization holds? And you can figure that out by looking at what's the process of promotion, what's the evaluation process like, what kinds of questions and metrics are being used during the evaluation. That's what an organization's attitude and theory is about a particular principle or behavior, and in our case, leadership. So a philosophy of leadership then answers the question of origin and essence, that's ontology, of how you become a leader, and it also answers the question of the development and demonstration, which is epistemology, of how you know you are one. Okay, so ontology is about being, the origins of something, and epistemology is about the knowledge or know-how and how one becomes aware of what they know. So what is that? What it is that you believe what it is about leadership, and can it stand up under scrutiny? So that's a question you need to ask. There should be a question mark there, sorry. What is it that you believe about leadership, and can it stand up to scrutiny? A mature philosophy of leadership, get this, is not based on myths, urban legends, and wives' tales. A mature philosophy of leadership can stand up under scrutiny. Goes back to that comic I showed you at the very beginning. It's about, can everyone do it, and does everyone have the opportunity to be able to do it? That's a mature philosophy of leadership. So as we unpack this then, a theory then is an attitude held by a person that acts as a guiding principle. Okay, we said that, a philosophy or theory. Several components are evident in that definition. One, a theory, which serves as a basis for how you act. So theories evolve as new information is processed, and we learn from our experiences. If you are saying leadership is always this way and it's open, nothing else, you're not actually practicing a theory, okay? A theory, again, by nature of its definition, evolves and changes as we learn new things. So leadership, like I just showed you about the outliers, your leadership philosophy should be evolving and changing if you were, no, leadership is always this, all leaders have to do this all the time, or as we learn new things, does it change? An attitude is about your mindset. Leaders embrace mindset to influence others in a positive way so meaningful results can be achieved. What is your mindset or your attitude about leadership? Do you get people to do what they do because you said so, because you're the boss, because you have formal power over them? There's different types of power: emergent power, referent power, legitimate power, jurisdictional power, coercive power. You can read about all those in most leadership textbooks. What kind of leadership do you practice? What kind of power do you demonstrate? It's based on the attitude that you have about leadership. A guiding principle then are principles or beliefs that we hold close, keeping us grounded and centered on how we lead. What are your leadership's guiding principles? Is it empathy? Is it sympathy? Different, two different things. Some leaders lead by empathy, some by sympathy. Is it X and Y? You remember McGregor's X and Y theory of leadership. I'm sure you've studied that. Do I hold an X component or a Y component? Do people, X component, are people always resisting work and don't like to work and need to be micromanaged to do what they need to do? Or are people generally capable of managing themselves and want to succeed and will be relatively motivated on their own? Those two philosophies or guiding principles are huge. What is your guiding principle? All leaders have to have certain experience, and it has to be an experience in this or not. What are your guiding principles? What beliefs do you hold close about your leadership? And then finally, behavior. Behavior is where our actions come together to match our words, and our words match our action. Behavior is where we lose or gain trust. What are your leadership behaviors? What I have found, if you want to truly discover and develop your philosophy of leadership, is your theories, attitudes, guiding principles, and behaviors must all match up. I have found over years of working with leaders that what people espouse as their theory, their guiding principles, or attitude do not match their behavior. So when you look at your philosophy of leadership and you personally reflect on how you're doing, you have to look at what do I actually do versus what I actually say I believe, and are they consistent? If you want to have an authentic philosophy of leadership, you have to do that. That's the second. So the first thing you're doing are challenging your assumptions. What is it that you believe about leadership? Once you come to those terms, the second thing you will do is now ask, do my behaviors in leadership, what I actually do, my demonstrated behaviors, do they match what I say? Here's the better question. Do the people who work around you in all areas, those above you and those below you, do the people who work around you, would they say that your behavior matches your espoused guiding principles and attitudes? Fundamental questions to ask. As we move forward, let's talk about epistemology. Epistemology is the nature of knowledge, or a study of how we know something. So again, back to my illustration earlier of how do we know when we become a leader? Like when I introduced myself for the first time as a professor. What was going on in my mind and my background and experience that made me comfortable now saying I am a professor, as opposed to before when I wouldn't have said that? What happened? This is kind of that, knowing that. So ontology is the process of becoming that. Epistemology is the awareness of how I knew that I was a professor. So let's look at this. Leadership learning is not a linear process. You don't go class 1, class 2, class 3, read this book, and this book, and then you are a leader. It's not linear like that. Leadership is organic, and by nature of being organic, it means it's chaotic, not in a bad sense. Chaos means a non-linear. That's all chaos means, non-linear. Doesn't mean crazy or hectic like we think it does. Things that are chaotic just means they're non-linear or an unrecognized pattern. So leadership learning is very chaotic in the sense that one lesson that I experience here and somebody else experiences at the exact same time may have taught me something that they're not ready to learn yet. But because I learned it now, it prepares me for this. They haven't learned it yet, but they'll learn it later on, and eventually way down the road, we're in the same place, but it happens haphazardly, okay? It is a systematic process with several interactive elements operating in relation to each other. So get this, because it sounds counterintuitive. It's non-linear, but it's also systematic. This is where chaos theory is amazing to try to understand. It has tremendous implications for leadership. In true chaos theory, they are unrecognized patterns. So they're patterns, there's a system there, there's a method of process, but it's unrecognized. It's not linear. Only after the fact do you recognize and see the pattern. So leadership development has certain things. Everyone needs to, for example, make decisions, try things, fail, trial and error. We need to read certain things, but everybody will learn these at different rates, different processes, and make different meanings around them along the way. If we had a class that everybody took, not everybody at the end walks out of that class with the exact same outcomes. Some take years later, some get it early, some get it later. That's what that means. The second point there, some leadership learning behaviors are more risky than others. I think that goes without having to explain much further. Certain things we can do, certain things we can try have more consequences or less consequences than other things. However, what tends to be the case is the things that have higher consequences seem to be our better learning opportunities. Number 3, leadership learning process are not generic. In other words, they're not just anything, anytime. Leadership learning is not random, or haphazard, in spite of being not linear, okay, again, it's unrecognized patterns. Okay, so there are things that happen, all things need to happen, but they don't happen necessarily sequentially. Okay? Leadership learning processes are deliberate, specific, individualized, and based on preferences. In other words, if I want to learn to be a leader and become and know that I'm a leader, I have to do certain things, and I have to be very intentional about those things. Now, how I'll learn it, the lessons I take, those are all different, back to point number one. But I have to be very intentional about becoming a leader. 4, and there are common metrics to leadership learning in the general areas of knowledge development and application, but not necessarily an experience. So for example, we want everyone to learn empathy, for example. Some people can learn and understand empathy through a dialogue and a discussion. Some people actually have to experience the pain themselves. So those are different examples. It's a very complex concept, epistemology is, but it's things that we need to understand. And I want you to look at these points, and even though they seem to be contradicting each other, they're not. And you really have to unpack the nature of complexity and chaos to get that. The best way to do that, again, as I've already mentioned, understand that chaos is unrecognized patterns. Okay? They're non-linear, but they are procedural. Okay? So that's a fun thing to talk about in leadership development and how we become leaders and how we know we are leaders. The next piece of this leadership philosophy has to do with the types of knowledge. There are 2 types of knowledge, explicit and tacit, and this is obviously directly related to epistemology. Explicit knowledge is, again, things we can convey to you in a course, in a book, and that you can convey to us. Tacit knowledge are the intangible things, and the metaphor commonly used for the difference is an iceberg. You can see there an illustration here behind me. The tip of the iceberg up here is explicit knowledge. It's what we can measure, it's what we can see. Underneath the surface of the water then is way more substance, but we can't see that. We don't know that it's there because we don't see it. That's what tacit knowledge is. Most of the decisions we make in life are based on tacit knowledge. In other words, that means most of the things you do in life, you don't know why you do them. And when somebody asks you why you do them, you say, I don't know. Just lucky, or just guessed, or little birdie told me, or intuition, or something like that, when in fact that's not the case. There are things there, you just haven't been paying attention to them. So developing a philosophy of leadership requires intentionally getting into the tacit domain of your knowledge, the tacit domain of your experiences and your assumptions. So when you have an assumption about leadership, again, back to our first slide, what is that assumption? You need to be a leader because, or I am a leader because, or everybody who wants to be a leader needs to do fill in the blank. That answer is based on your tacit knowledge. You have to go back and uncover why it is you believe that climbing that tree is an essential requirement for every leader. That's based on your tacit knowledge. You didn't learn that in a class, or did you? And if you did, does it really stand up under scrutiny? You might have learned in a class that to be a leader you have to be tall. Is that really true? No, there are plenty of great leaders who are short. So that's not true. It's about this, it's an IQ thing. I mean, think about this. Why is scholastic testing and exams and IQ a bad way to measure intelligence? Because you know, and I know, too many people who are brilliant who scored lousy on their exams, and we know too many people who scored great on their exams who are dumb as a box of rocks. Okay? Same thing's true here. Leadership philosophy is about understanding the difference between tacit and explicit knowledge and realizing that most of what you do, most of what you believe truly is tacit. It means it's beneath the surface and you haven't really explored it. And to develop a philosophy of leadership where you know what you're doing and are convinced and convicted about the decisions you make, you have to understand and explore that tacit knowledge. And then finally, the last slide here is leadership primarily a cognitive or metacognitive process? This is a question I'm going to leave for you to explore on your own. This is fundamental to developing your own philosophy of leadership. I put the definitions there of metacognition and cognition so that you can have a foundation, but I want you to ask yourself the question, is leadership a cognitive or a metacognitive process? And in relation to ontology, which is becoming or being a leader, and epistemology, which is about your awareness and knowledge that you are a leader, how does cognition and metacognition fit into that process? Okay, I want you to think about that. I'm not going to comment any more on that, and this is actually the last slide of this session, but I want you to see how that works and answer that question for yourself, if not as a formal assignment. This will go a long way in helping you develop your philosophy of leadership. Thank you.